Timber! 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 Roll the mountains high, down the canyons wide. Let me roam and ride through timber. When the day is done, timber! By the Templars gleam. Let me lie and dream of timber. Tall timber's calling, and the echoes ring. For all nature sings a song along the timber trail. Blue shadows falling down the canyon's vale, and the whispering pines entwine along the timber trail. High in the sky above, the love song of the trees will blend and wend its way out on the breeze. Tall timbers calling, and the echoes ring. For all nature sings a song along the timber trail.
With the advent of large-scale logging in Central Oregon at the turn of the century, came two of America's largest pine milling plants, Brooks Scanlon Incorporated, now the Crown Pacific Mill, and the Shevlin-Hixson Company on the west bank of the Deschutes River. Brooks Scanlon, which moved to Bend from Minnesota, bought the East Bank site from the Bend Company and announced plans for a Ponderosa pine mill on August 18, 1915. Brooks Scanlon eventually bought out its competitor in 1950, but at their height, the two friendly neighbors employed more than 1,000 men from steel gangs to weed control crews, and upwards from 80 million board feet of lumber were stacked at one time awaiting shipment. In 1980, Diamond International purchased the mill, selling it to DAW in 1984. The mill was purchased by Crown Pacific on September 8, 1993.
Of the trees will blend and wend its way out on the breeze. Tall timbers calling, and the echoes ring. For all nature sings a song along the timber trail. The timber trail. Timber! 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 Timber!
My name's Don Rupert, and I'm a forester with Crown. I've been with Diamond, DAW, Brooks Scanlon since '77. I was scaled falling crew when I started here.
Yeah, he's got equipment right there.
And seen a lot of the same changes Glenn has, although not as many. But there's quite a history to this outfit, and the town of Bend really is built around Brooks Scanlon and Shevlin-Hixson. They both came here from Minnesota in 1915. They announced they were going to build
Francis Canada.
build mills. And this was one of the operations of Brooks Scanlon. They had outfit in Powell River, British Columbia, Foley, Florida, Louisiana. Actually, they had something in the Bahamas and Cuba, plus Minnesota. But when they came here, they were running out of timber back there. And they had been out here around the turn of the century buying timberland, timber. And they brought, when they came out here and built their mill in 1916, what is the Mill A building down by the Colorado Street Bridge, they brought a lot of their own people with them. A lot of the people in this town came from Minnesota. All you have to do is probably read the obituaries and you'd see how many people were born in Bemidji, Minnesota. But at any rate, they came here, and Brooks has actually owned another sawmill under the Bend Company. It was across the river and down by Columbia Park. Clyde McKay was the vice president, but Dr. Brooks was the president of the Bend Company, and they bought the assets of Alexander Drake, the one that platted the city of Bend. And mostly he was into irrigation, cutting up flume timber, but at any rate, this particular site right here was the Sizemore Ranch. Sizemore and a fellow by the name of O'Neill built a log cabin here, which sat right where the truck shop sits now. It was a school at one time. It was built in 1881, and it was the first post office in Bend, back when, before Bend was incorporated. It was just a, you know, any little community could apply for a post office. And he applied for the name Farewell Bend, sent it off to the federal government, and they shortened it up to Bend. They had Mill A going, and Chevron has mill right across the river from them. And they were operating 3 logging camps on the Fort Rock district, what's now the Fort Rock district. The logging railroad, they started cutting logs right here in town, kind of just worked their way south and east. Chevron started that side of the river, the west side, worked their way kind of south, and they worked around the other side of the Paulinas. But anyway, 1923, they started to build the new Mill B, which was 3 head rigs, 3 bandsaws. You could conservatively say that that mill has cut over 5 billion board feet. I think one of the early inventories I read of the Deschutes, what they're calling the Deschutes Plateau, says there was 16 billion board feet when they started. But they were big outfits, and they're when they built Mill B, they had to put on extra logging camp. They bought an extra locomotive, an extra McGiffert loader. I mean, a whole extra crew went on out in the woods to supply wood for it. They had, like we talked earlier, it had a planing mill, a lath mill, a picket mill, a molding plant, box factory. That was the industry in Bend, Oregon, was lumber.
On September 10, 1993, nearly a century later, the last large log was processed in the large log portion of this landmark mill, signaling the closure of that portion of the mill and a precursor of the closure of the entire facility 4 months later. The passage of the last log through the mill was a ritual farewell to a way of life that had been a trademark in Bend, Oregon for nearly a century. A livelihood that had its own language, dress, customs, and history, and attracted a rugged combination of family man and outdoors man, adventurer and artisan. And it was, above all, a profession that put bread on the table of generations of Central Oregon families.
My name is Dick Coe. I've been with the company for 33 and a half years. I spent about the last 4 or 5 years in the big mill, running the scoop, taking care of the bark, getting it ready to go to the bark plant. Previous to that, I run the bark plant as lead man for 15 years. And before then, I gyppo car loaded up on the other end. But the last years in the taking care of the bark at the mill was interesting, and I enjoyed working in the big mill. When we run our last log through the mill was a real sad day. I'm only about 2.5 years from retiring, so It could have squeaked by just a little longer, would have been nice, but these things happen. You see it all the time on the TV happening to plants around the country, and you always kind of think, oh, I feel sorry for them, but you don't think it'll ever happen to you. But it hit home. I think mills are a dying breed. There's going to be some left, but nothing like these big mills that process the timber like this one does. I doubt if we'll see many of them around anymore. Environmentalists, a big part. They've taken our jobs away. It's could be some blame to the mills over the years of logging too heavy, but I think we'd still be running if the timber wasn't all tied up, and we can't get any to run the mill. Get all the education you can, because some of these labor jobs aren't going to be there. Everything's becoming high-tech, and you better be prepared, because you're going to have to work with your brain rather than your muscles like a lot of us did.
I've been working at this place for it'll be 17 years in April of '94. And I moved here to Bend 22 years ago. Seen a lot of changes. Moved here when there was probably 1,000 people that worked here. This was like the main employer. And I came over here because I thought, you know, it'd be a good future. As time went along, of course, things started dwindling down, and as we are left with, at this time, what, 120 of us? They call us the survivors. And, you know, it's kind of a somber time. It's sad. It is really sad. Like the papers, the Bulletin had an article, you know, losing a good friend. And that's true. But there's a lot of out-of-towners that are coming in here, and, you know, they don't understand. And that's understandable because they don't know the history. They haven't been here. They haven't seen it.
Anyway, Whitewater Dan, we called him. He lived there, had a house up right there on the river, and that was his job, looking after the river. Well, you'd get up in the morning about 5, 6 o'clock, and you'd hear boom, boom, boom. Well, you know he was froze up. Anyway, he'd come in there in the pawn shack, and they had a whole bunch of guys in there, and they had a big old pot-bellied stove, and it was red hot. Your old Dan come in there, and they'd put a half a stick of dynamite on the end of a piece of lath. They'd punch the hole and stick it in there, see? He come in there, and he had a half a stick of dynamite on this piece of lath, and he was drunker than hell like normal. Going near that stove, he cleaned that place out. They laughed. Yeah, I can sum it up pretty easy. Couldn't have been better. Raised a family, never got hungry. Yeah.
A whistle sounded for years at the mill, signaling the change from day to night shift. A harbinger of things to come, the mill ceased sounding the whistle due to complaints from the growing residential community. On September 10th, 1993, the last log reached the end of its sentimental journey through the mill. In an act of gentle defiance against the course of history, the whistle was sounded long and sang loud of the indomitable spirit of the mill and all who work there.